We're not looking for a ceasefire. I didn't say I was looking for a ceasefire. That was Emmanuel, nice guy, but he doesn't get it right too often. But we're not looking. We're looking for better than a ceasefire.
Nous ne voulons pas.
We do not want to see Iran acquire nuclear weapons or ballistic capabilities. But I believe the greatest mistake today would be to pursue regime change in Iran through military means, as that would lead to chaos.
Presidents Trump and Macron, they're clashing over how to ease the conflict between Iran and Israel. Global fears of the war escalating are rising after Trump ramped up his rhetoric demanding Iran's unconditional surrender and threatening Iran's leader. Live from Sydney, this is Insight with me, Paul Allen. Oil trading around a 5-month high on speculation about the US being dragged deeper into Israel's war with Iran. Phillip, Cornell, senior fellow at the Atlantic Council's Global Energy Center, is going to be joining us to discuss who will be hit hardest if Iranian supply is cut off.
I think you're going to end up with a regime change out of this. And the question is, who's going to take charge and how is it going to work? We sure didn't do a very good job in Iraq in 2003.
Yeah.
We went into Libya. Didn't do a good job there.
As Israel pushes for regime change in Tehran and Trump threatens the supreme leader, critics are warning of chaos. Joining us for more on that, we'll have Glenn Carl, retired CIA officer and former deputy U.S. National Intelligence Officer. He'll be sharing his view on the lessons learned from previous U.S. actions in the Middle East. Well, let's get to our top story today. President Trump meeting with his national security team to discuss the Middle East conflict, fueling speculation that the U.S. may join Israel's attacks on Iran. Before gathering with his advisors, Trump posted a demand for what he calls Iran's unconditional surrender and warned that Iran's supreme leader is, quote, an easy target. American weapons are seen as crucial to achieving a more complete destruction of the Islamic Republic's atomic program than anything Israel can do alone. Well, the situation sent oil prices near a 5-month high and prompted concern from world leaders about a wider war. For more on this, let's get to Horizon's Middle East and Africa anchor, Jemana Baseche in Dubai, and also our China correspondent, Min Min Lo in Hong Kong. Jemana, let's start with you. What did we hear from world leaders such as Macron and German Chancellor Merz at the G7 summit?
Yeah, well, that's exactly it. Since President Trump left that G7 summit early, there have been loads of questions swirling about what exactly the U.S.'s intentions are vis-a-vis the geopolitical conflict, the situation that has flared up in the last 5 days with no signs really of things de-escalating. Yesterday, he did convene a meeting with his national security advisors. He also had a phone call with the Israeli Prime Minister. No statement was released. There was no readout of the call that took place. And certainly, and you were speaking about this earlier, a couple of his tweets or his posts on Truth Social got a lot of attention, particularly when he used the term we, implying that the U.S. is somehow involved or tacitly participating in the strikes that Israel are conducting on Iran. Now, the Chancellor, Friedrich Merz, the Chancellor of Germany, who also was at the G7 summit, later came back home, conducted an interview with a German broadcaster, and he suggested that the U.S. would decide whether to join militarily in the interventions throughout the course of the next day. So we should be getting a response per the German side in the next 24 hours. But that if Iran doesn't return to the negotiating table, the complete destruction of Iran's nuclear program may be on the agenda. But other leaders, such as the French President Emmanuel Macron, are sounding a little bit more cautious. And he's saying, yes, there is no doubt that the whole international community is behind the decision for Iran not to develop the means to deploy a nuclear weapon. But at the same time, history would teach us to be cautious. And he specifically drew parallels between what happened in Iraq in 2003, Libya, the decade of quote-unquote chaos that followed through from those interventions, military interventions, and warning of the perils of actually pushing one step further and opting for an attempted regime change. So some leaders around the world are a little cautious cautious. But of course, everyone is waiting to see what the U.S. decides to do and whether they do want to get involved in this war militarily as well.
Jemana, we've also heard a warning from the UAE. Can you tell us a bit more about that and some of the other reactions from Middle Eastern countries so far?
So there was a joint statement put forward by the foreign ministers of Arab countries and Middle East and African countries as well. That was 27 members joined in on this statement condemning the actions that Israel took last week, saying that the ongoing Israeli military aggression against Iran violates international treaties. It violates the principles of the Charter of the United Nations. So the words of condemnation have been coming through from the region. I would just say that in terms of mediation, both Oman and Qatar and, of course, the UAE, so all of those countries and even Saudi Arabia, too, have been trying to de-escalate and trying to bring back especially Iran to the negotiating table to bring down the temperature and re-establish those diplomatic channels. You will recall, of course, that the U.S.-Iran nuclear deal discussions were supposed to be taking place in Oman the prior weekend. They were called off. The push out of Arab states now is to restart those discussions, but also bear in mind as well, none of them want to see an escalation or repeat of the tensions that took place earlier on 5-6 years ago in 2019, for example, when Aramco's Abqaiq sites were targeted. And so there really is a focus from Arab states to bring down the temperature. And also, this is part and parcel of their own definition of regional stability as they look to diversify away from oil. Contingent on that is having stability in the region, both politically and economically.
All right, Horizon's Middle East and Africa anchor Jemana Besetche there in Dubai. Min, over to you. President Xi Jinping says China's deeply worried about the conflict in the Middle East and says Beijing's ready to play a constructive role in restoring peace and stability. But realistically, what can China do here?
Yeah, that's a big question, isn't it? Because if you look at China's track record, China has also, for example, offered to facilitate peace talks between Israel and Palestine, but that hasn't really gotten anywhere. And China is now offering to mediate the Israel-Iran conflict. But China obviously would likely have the ear of Tehran more so than Israel, because the U.S. is still seen as by far the most important ally of Israel. And that is why the Foreign Ministry of China a couple of days ago had said that countries with influence over Israel should do more to calm the conflict. And that's clearly a veiled reference and an appeal to the U.S. to do more. And when it comes to Iran, Iran sells 90% of its oil to China, and China imports 2/3 of its crude from the Middle East. And that is why President Xi has said he is deeply worried about this conflict and the potential spillover effects. And so that's why President Xi also said that China is opposed to any actions that infringe upon the territorial integrity of other countries. That's long been a China principle, but it's a very strong stand where China has condemned the Israel attack. In contrast to many other Western countries, the US and European countries, many of whom are less keen or are more reluctant to condemn Israel's attack, and some of them supporting Israel in their right for self-defense against the threat of Iran's nuclear program.
So we're hearing that she's also going to be speaking to President Putin of Russia sometime this week. What's going to be on the agenda?
So that's according to a Kremlin aide who said that the two presidents could speak over the phone this week. And some analysts say on the agenda could be discussions of energy security, because as I mentioned earlier, China is heavily reliant on the Middle East, on its crude supply. And this tension in the Middle East could maybe create more impetus for both sides, China and Russia, to speed up discussions over this new pipeline deal, the Power of Siberia 2 pipeline deal, which Russia has been seeking with China. But China, while it's agreed to the deal, there's been some disagreements over the terms of that. China has been less reluctant to cooperate on that. So this could inject new urgency to that. And of course, you think about Iran, Russia, China, what do these three countries have in common? And they all have this common disdain towards the US-led international order. So both sides will likely want to coordinate on their common response towards the conflict as well.
All right, Bloomberg's China correspondent Min Lo there. Let's get a quick check now on oil prices with Avril Hong in Singapore. Avril, a lot of volatility in oil at the moment, understandably. What are you watching?
Absolutely. That volatility you speak of, we've been seeing oil price rallies sort of gaining momentum and then petering off a bit. Still, they are trading near those 5-month highs. And it's the concern about the escalation in the Middle East conflict, the speculation that the U.S. could take on a more direct role and get involved. Of course, the focus is also on the Strait of Hormuz and the concern that Iran could choke off this key waterway. Of course, this is not the consensus, but it is still a risk. And as to the concerns of the market that the U.S. could get involved, it's really about whether they could target Iran's energy infrastructure and export facilities. Now, let's take a look as well at positioning because we have seen Brent crude calls actually catching a bid, and in terms of the second month skew, that's actually surged to the highest since at least 2013. If you're looking at second month implied volatility, that's also climbed significantly. So all these bullish signals, there's been speculation about $100 a barrel on oil. For now, it sits below 80. The idea that oil markets are still well supplied, indeed, that is the view of the International Energy Agency, although its director, Fatih Birol, did warn that the outlook could rapidly change. Have a listen.
There are many uncertainties whether or not another party will be involved in this the conflict in Middle East or not, whether or not always the question, the Strait of Hormuz, which is very important, is going to be closed for some time or a longer time. These are all questions on the table because, as we all know, Strait of Hormuz is extremely important for the global oil and LNG trade.
Fatih Birol there highlighting the uncertainties, including a veiled reference to potential U.S. involvement, Paul.
All right, thanks very much, Avril. Let's get some more on this with Phillip, Cornell, Senior Fellow at the Atlantic Council Global Energy Standard, joining us now live. Phillip, I just want to pick up on a couple of points that Avril was making there. Firstly, regards the Strait of Hormuz. I mean, can Iran realistically close it? Because there's plenty of other countries in the region that have an interest in keeping that open.
Well, thanks very much, Paul, for having me. I think what Fatih Birol said is very true, that the Strait of Hormuz represents an enormous amount of daily oil trade and passage. Whether Iran can actually close the strait is a much more tricky question. You know, in the past, the idea that they could actually mine the strait or block traffic, that's really not a realistic probability. What we're talking about here is whether they can create enough danger for ships that are passing through in order to discourage transit. That means raising insurance rates, making it more expensive for crews that are willing to actually transit under such a danger. But even in the event that they fire on ships or make the Strait of Hormuz a dangerous passage, that will render huge retaliation and implications from all sorts of countries around the region besides just Israel. So that would really be an extreme and last resort.
Well, we've got oil prices up still about 18% on where they were a month ago, but, you know, perhaps not overreacting at the moment. What would cause a big breakout higher in your view?
Yeah, well, on Friday, we did see a relative jump in oil prices, but the reality is that the market has been relatively sanguine, particularly in the last couple of days. I think if we're talking about the last few hours where we've seen a raise in oil prices, it's because there's this uptick in rhetoric, including from Donald Trump's social media accounts that are really ratcheting up the temperature. But in fact, I think a lot of the market is cautious about scares about potential production or transit supply disruptions. They're remembering things like 2019. Your correspondents were mentioning 2019 when there was a strike by Iran on Saudi Arabian oil facilities, including Abqaiq, through which a huge amount of the world's daily oil is processed. And even then, the real impact on oil markets was relatively less than had been predicted. So I think a lot of the market now and traders are looking for actual disruptions and not about to act on a fear or a risk of a disruption. They've been burned in the past, and so they're looking at what's real and not what's threatened. What could really cause a big spike might be something again, a little bit more catastrophic. It could be direct threats to the Strait of Hormuz, the expansion of hostilities in the region that kind of move would cause, or that might cause that kind of move. And then you might see oil prices react substantially. But even in that case, I think that the impacts on actual oil production and movement would be relatively temporary. And that's something that even American strategists are thinking about as they consider whether to get involved.
Do you find it interesting that Iran's exporting infrastructure for oil has been relatively unscathed at the moment? One assumes there's a strategic reason for that. Any thoughts?
Yeah, well, so most of the Iranian export is coming out of one particular location, out of Kharg Island, and at least 80 to 85% of it is going to one destination, and that's China. So for the moment, I think directly attacking Iranian export infrastructure is considered too provocative, not just to the Iranians, but also potentially to global oil markets, and that the effect that could have on Americans, particularly from the view coming out of Tel Aviv, and even on the impact that might have on China. So in all these cases, I think that hitting Kharg Island and hitting directly Iranian export infrastructure has been not the case so far.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the potential for U.S. involvement in this conflict. President Trump has previously prided himself on not starting or getting involved in foreign wars, but at the same time, there's a unique opportunity here to degrade Iran's nuclear infrastructure quite severely. On the balance of probabilities, how do you see the U.S. moving here?
Yeah, well, I'll tell you, I'm in Washington, and it's still Tuesday night here. And no doubt that the American National Security Council and President Trump have been meeting at the White House to decide what their next plan of action is. It really focuses around one particular site, and that's the Fordo nuclear site, where there are centrifuges and assets that are buried deep underground. And that's a site where only American munitions could actually make a difference. So from one side, as you say, I think that there is a, let's say, MAGA point of view here, which is not to get involved in foreign wars. And I think Donald Trump's very aware of his base when he wants to maintain that. On the other hand, this really is a unique situation after decades of being concerned about Iran's nuclear capability. This is really an opportunity from a tactical perspective that the Israelis have opened up in their, let's be honest, very spectacular tactical victories in terms of dominating Iranian airspace, decimating any kind of defensive capabilities, and really degrading the possibility of Iranian retaliation. And I think hour by hour, that might be one that Donald Trump is being more convinced of. We are seeing clear movements, whether it's by refueling tankers that have been crossing Europe all day, whether we see it in Donald Trump's own rhetoric, as I mentioned on social media, that they are sending signals that they're preparing or ready to do this. Now, that could be partly in order to elicit a reaction from the Iranian leadership and open the door to a deal being done very quickly. And I think that's what he was talking about on Air Force One. But if that deal does not happen, then I think that there is a pretty good probability that the Americans will consider seriously striking that Fordo facility. And that could have serious impacts, not least on what happens afterwards within Iran.
Yeah, let's talk about afterwards, because there's potentially another opportunity here too, and that is regime change. We heard earlier from French President Macron warning against the risks of that, but at the same time, there's not a lot of affection for the theocracy, not just outside of Iran, but inside of it as well. Is that a bridge too far?
Well, let's be honest, it's going to be very difficult for anyone to tell you exactly what's going to happen inside Iran, where are the fault lines within the society, and whether there's going to be an appetite, particularly following strikes first by the Israelis and then, in the event that we're talking about, by the Americans, not to, at least temporarily, rally around the flag. So I think talking about regime change flippantly is probably irresponsible. On the other hand, when I look at sort of the reactions from the Europeans, you mentioned Emmanuel Macron, but we also had Chancellor Merz saying pretty openly today that the Israelis are doing the West's dirty work. And I think what that implies is that there is broad agreement that Iran cannot be allowed to develop a nuclear weapon, and that there is support, at least within the Western alliance, that actions to stop that are going to be supported, even though regime change might be a bridge too far. I mean, the problem is we don't know what happens after a regime change. Anyone that tells you that it's going to be something like a walk in the park that's not Israeli is not someone to trust.
Yeah, and certainly past experience suggests that what comes next is never easy. Phillip, before we let you go, you are there in D.C. Can you tell us a little bit about the domestic appetite within the U.S. for action on Iran? How much social license does President Trump have here for getting involved?
Look, I think since quite a long time, there's not a lot of love for Iran, at least for the Iranian regime, and not a lot of love for the threat that it poses. I think that despite fault lines that have been drawn within the American electorate around Israel's behavior in Gaza in particular, as well as in the West Bank and towards the Palestinians, has driven a lot of division. But I think that kind of division is probably not as prominent when we're talking about Iran, and particularly when we're talking about its nuclear capabilities. So I think whether it's in America and among the American electorate, or even among the Western European electorate, there's not going to be so much division until we see, I don't know, much more of a mess turn out in Iran, in which case things get uglier, and then who knows what the political support is.
All right, on that note, we must leave it. Phillip Cornell, Senior Fellow at Atlantic Council Global Energy Center, thanks so much for joining us today. Still to come on Insight, more analysis on the Middle East crisis. We're going to be joined by former CIA Deputy National Intelligence Officer Glenn Carl. This is Bloomberg. Inside some of the other stories that we're following, the European Union is refusing to hold an economic meeting with China, blaming a lack of progress on trade disputes. Such a meeting typically lays the groundwork for a leaders' summit, but a source says it's been scrapped, along with the digital dialogue that was expected in the coming weeks. Fresh tensions have flared in recent weeks over China's decision to put export curbs on rare earth metals, which are vital to Europe's auto industry. President Trump has delayed for a third time the deadline for Chinese company ByteDance to divest the U.S. operations of TikTok. The 90-day extension provides another lifeline for the app, which has been a source of friction between the U.S. and China. It also gives the Trump administration more time to secure a complicated agreement that would require an American buyer and Beijing's sign-off. A weapons research group says India has added 8 warheads to its nuclear arsenal in the past year, bringing its total to 180. The Stockholm International Peace Research Institute also says India appears to be changing the way it prepares warheads by keeping them closer to missile launch systems. Rival Pakistan's nuclear stockpile remained at 170, while China has increased its arsenal faster than any other country. Still to come, we're going to be joined by former CIA Deputy National Intelligence Officer Glenn Carl. He'll be joining us with his insights on whether President Trump may deepen U.S. involvement in the Israel-Iran conflict. This is Bloomberg. All right, look at that thing. That's a picture of the so-called bunker buster bomb. The US military, the only military in possession of such a weapon, the GPS-directed explosive assembled by Boeing, has been touted repeatedly as the only weapon capable of decisively ending Iran's nuclear ambitions and its uranium enrichment sites buried deep underground. Deploying the bomb, though, involves another crucial military asset, the American B-2 stealth bomber, and that would mean the US will have to fully and directly join Israel's war on Iran. Many observers think President Trump's rhetoric is increasingly pointing towards that possibility.
I've been negotiating. I told them to do the deal. They shouldn't have done the deal. The cities have been blown to pieces. They've lost a lot of people. They should have done the deal. I told them do the deal. So I don't know. I'm not too much in a mood to negotiate now.
Meanwhile, voices, including that of French President Emmanuel Macron, are warning that previous Western military entanglements in the Middle East show any push for regime change can often lead to other problems.
No to military actions aimed at regime change, because no one knows what comes next. Haven't we collectively seen the consequences this has had in the region and beyond? Does anyone think what was done in Iraq in 2003 was a good idea? Does anyone think that what was done in Libya last decade was a good idea? No.
I think you're going to end up with a regime change out of this. And the question is, who's going to take charge and how is it going to work? We sure didn't do a very good job in Iraq in 2003. Yeah. We went into Libya. Didn't do a good job there. So I hope the administration is going to follow the pattern that we used in Kosovo in 1999.
Well, joining us now is Glenn Carl, former CIA Deputy National Intelligence Officer. Glenn, thank you so much for joining us today. And I do want to pick up on that theme of regime change. Certainly the theocracy that rules Iran, not particularly well loved even inside the country as well as outside of it. But as General Clark and President Macron point out, history is littered with disastrous interventions of this kind. Even Iran itself, replacing Mohammad Mossadegh with the Shah kind of got us to where we are today. Is Emmanuel Macron right?
Oh, he certainly is. It's easy to break things. And the CIA, the United States, many other countries have long experience in actions that have overthrown governments. But in almost no instance ever has a revolution or a putsch or a coup or a regime change played out as the instigators, the catalyzers have hoped. One can't control 90 million people with multiple factions that are at each other's throats or at least diverge even just a little bit. So Macron's assessment is correct. That said, unless the regime changes, the fundamental issue probably will not, which is the regime currently defines itself in part by its stated intent to destroy Israel and kill every Jew in the Middle East.
Well, there have been a number of attempted internal uprisings in Iran before, which have ultimately gone nowhere. How is the state of the opposition in Iran at the moment? Is it coherent or not?
Well, I think not. I think the overwhelming majority of the population has no love for the regime at all. The most pro-American, the most pro-Western of all Muslim countries is Iran. That would change as American bombs start to fall there, probably. But that is actually not that significant a factor because, like most dictatorial regimes or ruthless ones, the mullahs and in particular the Revolutionary Guards have eliminated by killing them or imprisoning them or cowing them just about every individual and faction that could hope to be a coherent alternative. In addition, it's the Revolutionary Guards who have all of the weapons essentially, and the revolution comes from the end of a gun, and so does regime stability.
All right. Well, that's a challenging situation around that potential objective. But let's talk about another potential objective, and that is at least crippling Iran's nuclear program. There seems to be a window open to do that. But can Israel do it without the assistance of the United States?
Well, I think every intelligence officer in the world has been, frankly, our jaws have dropped at the brilliance tactically of the Israeli intelligence and then the military actions. And they've had substantial success in damaging Iran's missile, air defense, and nuclear facilities. But substantial success is not complete success. I think that I don't have special insights, but all the experts assess that without the use of the American bunker buster bomb that you had on the screen a few moments ago, the facilities can't be completely destroyed. But even if that is used and is successful, and I think that it could be, that still doesn't change the long-term strategic dynamic, which is that Iran has defined itself by its hostility to the United States, to the West, by its pledge to destroy Israel, by its support for the Palestinians, and by its belief that a nuclear weapon is the only inoculation that will protect the state from invasion or regime change. That's largely true, not entirely. But unless the regime is changed, those factors won't. And so Israel has already, and the U.S. With the bunker buster could extend a period, a medium term, we'll say it, a period of certainly increased strategic security from a nuclear issue, and Iran will be helpless. But that won't change the hostility and the definition of the regime itself unless the regime no longer exists.
I'm just curious about an operational issue as well, which I'm not sure you may or may not be able to answer. I understand the maximum penetration of the bunker buster is 61 meters. It's possible that the Iranian nuclear facilities are deeper than that. So what happens in a case like that?
I don't know that, but the thought that has come to mind as an intelligence officer is that you don't believe anything unless you see it and verify it yourself. So I would want, if I were involved in the command process and the decision was taken to use the bunker buster and all the other munitions, I would want to have my own eyes verifying that things had been destroyed sufficiently. So to me, that would imply some way, and there are multiple ways you could do it, I guess, having American or Israeli personnel or at least agents verifying that the effects had been what was hoped for. Short of that, I wouldn't believe it. If there's a doubt, if there's a question, then you have to take the worst case assumption. Otherwise, you'll be caught short.
Well, you very comprehensively unpacked the complexity of solving this issue. I mean, there is a regime with a stated goal of wiping Israel off the map. As long as the regime remains, it will doubtless continue to pursue that goal. So having exhausted the possibilities of regime change from the outside and the difficulties of mounting that from within, are there any options left? Is the theocracy there to stay?
I think that is less and less likely now. I would have said probably yes, even 10 days ago. But given the shifting sounds coming from the White House, from Donald Trump, and the dramatic level of success and the relative helplessness of Iran, I think regime change is growing more likely every day. Now, that's we could break that down into two parts. I think that it's not impossible. I think it's relatively easy. I don't want to sound sanguine, really, to destroy the mullah's regime. But it's not conceivable almost to do something coherent, lastingly, that one can control after that. So to break things is conceivable. What comes after, as President Macron said, no one's ever been able to control that. And goodness me, the United States, every country should know from our experience in Iraq, in Afghanistan, most recently in much more limited sense in Yemen. 40 years ago, when I was starting my career in Lebanon, things don't play out as hoped when there's an occupation and a regime change.
Is there a role here for some of the other states in the Gulf to play?
Well, I think only really in air defense now. The Sunni and the Shia, that's part of another strategic dynamic and clash that overlays or underlays the West-East Israeli, Iran, Palestinian-Israel problems. I don't see short-term a particular role they could play in helping construct what comes after the mullahs. Not for now, really. I see a clearer role that I would hope for with regard to Palestine and Gaza. But at the moment, I don't see concrete steps that they could take right away.
Mm-hmm. And how about a role for China? Obviously, China relies heavily on Iranian oil, so it has an interest here. Could it also broker peace or broker something in the aftermath in the event of a regime collapse?
Well, they already are making those noises. It's always nice to present yourself as the peacemaker and to call for calm and stop killing each other. That's easy to say, and positions yourself well. China, I think, so far is to the extent there's a loser other than Iran right now. China is suffering a little because they are interested in low-cost oil. And if the regime that they have cozied up to for that reason is destroyed or damaged, as it already has been, then that will hurt China economically. A larger role than that, it's conceivable, I suppose, that they would do to Iran what they have been doing with Russia, although I don't really think so. And that is, they don't provide weapons, but they will provide things that can be used in the defense establishment. So maybe they'll sell 100,000 washing machines that have computer chips that could help the cyber capabilities of Iran, or missiles or things like that. But beyond that, I don't see what they can do in the short term, really, other than call for calm and position themselves as the peacemakers.
Glenn, before we let you go, you were mentioning that the speed and the effectiveness of Israel in achieving its aims so far against Iran have been quite effective. Do you think some of your former colleagues in the CIA might be a little bit surprised by the pace of the events of the past few weeks?
Well, if they're like I am, I mean, they'll know more firsthand information than I do now, since I'm no longer in the government, but it's the operations against Hezbollah in the past year, and now these operations are built upon absolutely brilliant intelligence. They know down to the last cuticle just about what their targets are up to and where they are and how to go after them. And it is brilliant in the technical sense.
All right, Glenn Carl, former CIA Deputy Intelligence Officer, thanks so much for joining us with your insights today. Still to come this hour, the Super AI Conference is underway in Singapore. Our tech reporter Annabelle Drewlers is there, joins us now. Belle, what have you got coming up?
Thanks, Paul. Yeah, this is Super AI. More than 7,000 attendees expected here over the coming days, more than 1,000 speakers as well. But one is going to be joining us just after the ad break. This is Hemant, Mohapatra, India partner at Lightspeed. We'll be talking about the VC landscape in India, investment theses across Southeast Asia, North Asia as well. We'll have plenty more ahead. This is Bloomberg.
We are planning to invest more into R&D, both AI and drug R&D, start more new programs in therapeutic areas adjacent to the areas we're working on. We're very passionate about aging research and longevity.
In the world of AI, there's training and then there's inference, running the models. We are purpose-built for inference. So from the silicon, the chips, all the way to the cloud, everything's cost optimized, performance optimized for inference.
I think that future of AI is that we don't just see AI front and center, it will be just integrated in whatever we're doing. We see strong adoption here across the region.
Some of our guests there at the Super AI conference now underway in Singapore, and let's get over to the event where Annabelle Drewlers is standing by with our next guest, Belle.
Paul, joining us this morning is Hemant, Mohapatra, partner at Lightspeed India, and thanks so much for taking the time to speak with us. You're here to talk with people about funding frontier technology and frontier AI, but what does that look like to you right now, but also what are you most excited about in the frontier tech space?
Thank you for having me, Annabelle. Frontier for us means something that's new to the world, or new to the region we invest in. And in the regions we invest in primarily are US, Southeast Asia, India, and Europe. I'm representing the India and the Southeast Asia fund, so we're looking at stuff that is new to that region or new to the world coming out of that region. In terms of frontier tech, we have made investments in a company called Pixel Space, which is doing hyperspectral satellites and data from space. They've gone on to raise about $95 million with us and other top-tier investors in the world. So that's an interesting area. We're looking at space tech quite a lot in India, from India for the world. We're looking at defense tech quite a bunch. India's defense spending is one of the largest in the world and is growing quite quickly. And the defense needs, even we share borders with a lot of countries, it's growing quite quickly as well. So defense tech is another area we are spending a bunch of time. There's a bunch of frontier tech that is coming into defense. The third area is robotics. At this conference, there are a bunch of robotic companies moving around here. Robotics is a big part of what we are spending a lot of time on globally, but also from India and Southeast Asia. And the fourth one is semiconductors. I think semicon is seeing a revival with AI-specific ASICs coming out, and India has one of the largest talent pools of semicon. 22 to 25% of AMD, Intel, Texas Instruments actually are based in India. So we do see some very high-quality talent across design, engineering, product, and commercials coming out of that region. So we are actively spending time on those categories.
Humanoids is an area, and you're mentioning about the exhibitors. I mean, we're right next to Unitree, for instance, which is one of the best-known names out of China. But do you see countries in Southeast Asia and India as well that are able to compete with those players from China?
So I think it's going to be tough. China is absolutely, quite far ahead, and the US is quite far ahead. But look, India's advantage is essentially around the fact that we have some of the largest corpus of human available data that can train foundation models for robotics. The tough thing about robotics is building a brain. The manufacturing part is not the hardest part. Building the brain is the hardest part. The reason we are seeing a lot of renaissance in robotic tech again is because robots are now finally at a point where the brain can be implanted in the body and it can navigate unstructured environments and do unstructured nebulous things like fold my laundry. That used to be it still is a very challenging problem, because then first you have to go figure out where your laundry is, what kind of laundry is it, can I fold it, is it foldable even, what does folding really mean, where do I put it when I fold it, is it in the cupboard, on the hangers? Those are very unstructured things in a household environment, but those things are becoming easier because foundation models are now able to absorb your environment around you and take decisions very, very easily and very quickly. To train foundation models requires a lot of human data. So the kind of companies we are seeing coming out of India are not fundamentally building a end-to-end, fully integrated robotics company like a Unitree. We are not building that. What we are seeing happen is a lot of really high-quality people coming out of DeepMind or other robotic tech companies that have built interesting solutions in the past. They're coming back to India and saying, the biggest roadblock has been data. And what data do we need? We need data about humans moving around in an environment. If I want to fold clothes, I want 10,000 people to fold clothes to show me how it is done. And that data is much more easily available in India than anywhere in the world.
So what's sort of the state of play then? Because I think one of the trends that we're seeing definitely in China is that either people are coming home from the US or they're choosing not to go to the US and do study and are taking advantage of the manufacturing base, for instance, there, the data that's also there, the talent pool that's there. Do you see a similar trend happening in India today?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm part of that trend. I lived in the US for about 15 years. Worked at companies like AMD, Google, A16Z, and then I moved back in 2018. In the last 4 to 5 years, thanks to policy changes and it becoming a lot harder to get a full green card in the US and taking a lot longer, I think maybe twice or thrice in a month, I see a high-quality person pinging me on LinkedIn or Twitter saying, hey, I want to move back. I read about your article that you wrote about moving back to India 5-6 years ago. Can I have a chat? And these used to be people that would be, more run-of-the-mill, gone to US 5-10 years back, did an MBA, worked for a few years. But now we are seeing very high-quality research people coming back because the jobs are not available. We have companies that are doing cutting-edge work in India, and the biggest challenge for them used to be, if I move back, I'm close to family, I'm close to my friends, I'm close to my culture. I just don't think I can do anything from a career perspective. Those problems are changing now. We have enough number of companies that are doing cutting-edge work. It's not where we need it to be. I think we have a long way to go, but it's changing very quickly.
You mentioned space and the defense area as well, and space, of course, has a lot of defense applications. And what's sort of the deal size, and how is that changing? Because you're in an environment not of just rising geopolitical tensions between the US and China, but you see it in India as well with your borders. So what's it looking like today?
So I'll give you an example of a company we invested in at seed stage in 2019, 2020. The company called Pixel Space. They're doing, not defense specific, but they have a lot of defense contracts now. When they began, their thesis was that it is very hard to see what's really happening on Earth using just three spectrum of visible light, red, blue, and green. But their thesis was that we need to see world in a lot more spectrum. So they built a technology called hyperspectral cameras that see about 400 bands from space, which allows you to see underwater. It allows you to see what kind of oil spillage might have happened on water, which you can't see with naked eye. It'll allow you to see chemical composition of smoke and steam, and so on and so forth. They've gone to raise about $95 million in the last couple of years from top-tier funds globally. So I think the issue with space tech or defense tech is that it's very hard to build. It's very hard to build cutting-edge tech. It takes 3 to 4 years, and what in our business we call a deep J curve. If you kind of go down very deep into a lab and you come out 3 or 4 years later, it's something that the world has never seen. And if you're able to then commercialize it really well, there is absolutely a lot of capital available to you. But it's going to be selective, it's going to be hard, and you got to find almost a missionary founder who really wants to spend his or her life solving that problem. In any of these areas, defense tech is one example, but space tech, defense tech, robotics, quantum are all examples of the same.
All right, well, it sounds like you could be finding more of those people making their way back to India as well. But that was Hemant Mohapatra, their partner at Lightspeed India, Paul.
All right, Annabelle Jewell is there in Singapore, and that is it for Insight. We've got Horizons Middle East and Africa coming up next. Stay with us. This is Bloomberg.